I'm picturing you using one of those things the whole time you're asking me questions, and at the end it's going to spit out a game, and that game is going to be like a portrait mode shower simulator with Mario in it or something.
That would be really impressive, and you've given me an idea.
You're listening to Level Up with Melissa Zalou.
So today on the show, we have Warren Woodward from Nexon, the San Francisco branch of Korea's biggest gaming company. Warren, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
So let's maybe kick off with you just to kind of looking at your personal story. Today, you're the UA director at Nexon, and you've been in gaming for a few years, but you were a video editor back in the day. What pushed you to leave the video world and move into gaming?
Yeah, that's correct. So I got into user acquisition around 2009, before it was really called that. And I got into it because I had decided to pursue some things in life that weren't the best ways of making money. So I was like touring, playing in bands, and I was making independent films. And those things are really fun, but they're tough ways to pay the bills with like consistent income. So I was working at a local video editing place. And a lot of my day was spent like capturing reels of film and tapes. And so there's a lot of downtime. I would just read news articles. And I read an article that was basically, the headline was, this was back in the MySpace days. And the headline was, what's up with all those spammy ads on MySpace? and it sounded interesting. So I read about it, and I learned about this world of like affiliate marketing, or basically like mercenary marketers that just get paid when they bring registration or a sale.
Mercenary marketers. I like it.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, that actually sounds kind of intriguing. Let me learn more about this. So I dug into it, and I told my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, like, hey, I'm going to try this thing after work. Bear with me. I'm going to sink a couple $100s into it. And if I lose all my money, I'll never speak of it again. So I tried it for a couple months, and ended up having my first couple of profitable ad campaigns, spending my own money. And I kind of got the bug and went heavier into it. And after about a year and a half of doing it as a hobby, I was making more money than my day job. So I quit my day job and just became a full-time performance marketer on my own. And,
wow. Okay. Yeah. And then how did you end up in gaming?
Sure. So it was really satisfying trying to build my own business out of that, and was exciting for a while. But after a while, you kind of hit the ceiling of what you can do on your own. So I started seeing what I could do working with great companies. So I got involved in the startup scene in Southern California in some ad technology startups and agencies. And the whole time I've always been a very passionate gamer. And I was telling myself, like, hey, I'm spending a lot of my time selling other people's products that I'm not really passionate about. What if I leverage this into gaming, where I have the most of my passion?
How did you end up kind of coming from being a self-employed performance marketer to getting into gaming and doing user acquisition?
Yeah, so after spending a few years really selling other people's products in a profitable way for them, I got the bug to actually be doing this for products that I owned and that I was passionate about. And I've always been a huge nerd, huge gamer. And I wanted to see if I could do this in the gaming industry. So I reached out to a small new gaming company in Seattle at the time called Dropforge Games that were making, they had made a game that I really liked. They were bringing it to mobile. And I just wrote them a letter, and just a cold call email one night. And it's just like, hey, I love the game that you're working on. This is what I do. This is why I think I'd be a good match with you guys. What do you think about me moving up to Seattle and doing user acquisition for you?
Wow. And it worked?
Yeah, it was just a shot in the dark. And I remember like waking my wife up and being like, hey, I'm going to like email this company in Seattle and see if they're cool with me moving up there and working for them. Would you do that? And she was kind of half asleep, and she's like, yeah, whatever, just do it. And so that ended up working out very well. And so I joined this company, Dropforge, and this was 2014, I believe. Worked in Seattle in the gaming industry for a couple of years for a couple of different companies. And then got the offer last year to come down to Emeryville, California, just outside of San Francisco, and lead the UA team here at Nexon. So yeah, we have a team of 7 people now. Launched about a dozen games in the last 12 months, and lots of exciting things ahead.
Very cool. So you essentially you said you were a gamer. Do you think you have to be a gamer to work in gaming?
It definitely helps. It helps to be excited about coming to work every day and to have things that you can bond with your team about, and to be willing to dive into the products and learn a lot about them. Definitely helps with your product expertise. But, I definitely don't think it's the case. We've brought in a lot of good people on my team and other teams here that come from outside the industry. And, my whole time before this was doing performance marketing for products that I wasn't passionate about, didn't really know anything about the verticals. So it's definitely not necessary, but it keeps the day more interesting.
Right. You've also said somewhere that your passion is combining art, data, and psychology to create great marketing campaigns. And full disclosure, I'm pretty sure I'm quoting from your LinkedIn bio, which I think is awesome. That's no secret. Do you think there's a psychology of user acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a communication discipline in a large part at the end of the day. There is a tendency in user acquisition to build teams mostly from people with mathematics or data or finance backgrounds.
Right.
And that's obviously a huge part of it. But at the end of the day, we are doing marketing, we're doing advertising, and you have to still have the creative skills and soft skills within your team. Obviously not every person maxes out on every skill.
Right.
But you need to be able to understand messaging and what's going to connect with people, what will turn them off, and that's a huge part of it.
Right. Do you think that do you lean more heavily towards in terms of your background, you're covering both the harder data side of things with a lot of performance marketing, but then also the creative side, both sort of like in making independent films and in music. Do you lean more heavily to the creative side when you're kind of approaching a new user acquisition strategy, or is it equally is there an equal share for data and creative?
It's definitely more my comfort zone and my background. I probably sell myself short on math skills, but honestly, I've taken one math class post high school, and it was just to graduate state college. So I definitely don't have like the math chops of some of the awesome people on my team. I've always been good with just like napkin math and kind of quickly looking at data and telling the story from it.
Right.
But when I joined Nexon, I told them right up front, like, if you want the person with like the ability to write like the fanciest SQL query or the most in-depth analysis, I'm not your guy. But luckily the team here, it's a very complementary set of skills. So we have some people with finance background, some people with analytics background, and some people with marketing background. And there's a good atmosphere of mutual respect on the team, and kind of everyone helping out with their strengths. So it all comes together.
Interesting. Do you think you've seen the role of a UA manager change over time? Or certainly we can even talk about kind of performance marketing in general. How has that evolved since you first started getting into the industry?
Yeah, I think it's still a relatively young discipline. It's only really in the last 2-3 years that I've heard the industry at large really start valuing creative and understanding that that's sort of like the laziest and lowest cost way to move the needle in a really meaningful way.
Right.
As I alluded to, I think in the first couple of years of user acquisition being a discipline, it was primarily looked at as a data and analytics type of discipline. And what it's evolved to is, essentially replacing a traditional advertising team.
Right.
Marketing and traditional marketing is still a huge part of the games industry. I'm not selling that short in any way. But specifically, I'm talking to your paid advertising team that would be managing the media spend. And I think that user acquisition has fully arrived as just the replacement for that. That's more cost efficient, where you know where your money is going, what actually produced results. So why would you need that more traditional advertising arm? Right. Obviously, in times with launching a game or any kind of other product, there are still what we would call like more brand-focused elements of the plan, and that's definitely handled by our marketing team. But as far as the advertising you want to actually bring your users into the game. If you can tell exactly where your money's going and how it's performing, why would you want it any other way?
Right. It's difficult to argue with that. I mean, I did actually want to kind of touch on the dynamic between brand marketing and kind of paid user acquisition, because Nexon has quite a robust kind of marketing infrastructure with a lot of different kind of teams involved. How does your work on the UA side kind of fit into a larger strategy around launching a game that includes kind of brand marketing, which doesn't have the same kind of easily tracked ROI?
Yeah, I think an important role of a brand marketing, or at Nexon, it's called the product marketing team, is establishing like the story and the vision for how we're going to bring this game to customers. Like, what's the story behind the game? Like, what are the unique selling propositions to the player? And how do we tie this all together so there's consistency between our different efforts? Like, that's still a very real part of the equation, as well as like the outreach within the industry. So working with the platforms, Apple and Google, to tell them about our game, to figure out partnerships that make sense for launching the game. And we definitely work. I mean, I sit literally next to the person who heads up that part of our business, and we work very closely together. But I think user acquisition is a lot more reactive, whereas brand marketing is a little more, I guess I would call it visionary, for lack of a better word.
Right, I hear that.
Often taking the blank slate and trying to put those initial ideas out there, put the good fuel in the marketing machine and the user acquisition machine, and hopefully working with the brand marketing team and the creative team, we develop a robust set of ads and messaging. And then our team, takes it to the marketplace. We buy inventory everywhere, and we see which of those things and those messages, those videos work. And then we start the feedback loop where we start coming to the other marketing teams with data, and we're saying like, hey, here's what's performing. This is working. This is not working. Why don't we explore more messaging or more pieces of content in this realm? And then we provide that feedback loop where the marketing team and creative team can start brainstorming their next deliverables.
Right. It's kind of an ideal situation in a way, because brand marketing, brand advertising is very difficult to kind of quantify and then also to kind of get feedback on. The metrics are much looser if they exist at all. But to be able to kind of plug that in, or to have that form the basis then of a kind of more direct campaign, and then leverage the data that comes out of that is sort of ideal.
Yeah. And I think a good snapshot of maybe the extremes is when you think about a trailer in the console world. So a lot of people that are coming from console backgrounds, and that's all about maybe you have a $1 million budget for your video content to launch a game. So you make this $1 million trailer. You go with the best agency and director and creative people. You spend months making it perfect, fine-tuning everything. You have beautiful animation or maybe actors in it. You go through revisions, and then you have this final, hopefully perfect trailer, and you bring that to market, and it looks great, but it's your one shot on goal. Whereas a team that maybe only had the UA approach would take that budget, divide it into 30, and make 30 different lower budget pieces, and test all those and see what worked the best. Neither of these approaches is really ideal. Obviously, from user acquisition, we have a bias to get a lot of data points. But if you never invest in that, in those higher end pieces of content that really showcase the project or make a big splash, you're selling yourself short for maybe finding the best performing creative. So here at Nexon, it's definitely a give and take between like taking a lot of shots in goal and then taking those really big swings with beautiful advertising and creative that we really invest in and fine tune.
Right. I want to talk about soft launching, because I know you have kind of lots of insight to share there. But kind of before we get there, it's interesting to note you founded two of your own companies, Handsomest Media and Genomics.
Yeah,
Is that
good
right?
research. So I guess cheating a little bit, because Handsomest Media was basically just me working on my own with my own agency.
How do you feed that that entrepreneurial bug now, kind of working inside a much larger company?
That's a good question. I always thought that I would really hate working for a large company, and really working at Nexon right now is the most I've probably ever enjoyed a job. And it's I think it's because we're constantly making things. It feels like we're always creating, we're always launching new products, but we also have the resources to do it in the right way.
Properly.
So it definitely never feels routine here. There's always a new challenge, a new game. And
right, you guys, you have a lot of, I mean, you're kind of releasing things at quite a steady clip.
Yes.
How often, or sort of looking at an average quarter or even month, how often are you releasing new games?
Yeah, so definitely if you graphed the pace that we're releasing games over time, it's definitely gotten faster and faster each month. But I would say for the last 12 months, it probably averages out to about a game a month, but it's really condensed in Q2 and Q3. So there's probably two games a month for those quarters.
Wow. And how kind of far in advance are you planning the launch strategy for each game?
Ideally, we start planning. I'll have to deviate a little bit to talk about like the ways that we get games at Nexon. So Nexon is both a developer and a publisher. So that means we make games, and we'll know about those sometimes years in advance and start planting the seeds for the launch, or at least marketing explorations for those. But at the same time, we're also in the business of signing promising games to publishing deals. We did this with a game called Battlejack, developed out of Helsinki this year, where the game was already done when we signed it, so it was ready to go to market. So it's everything from several years to a couple of weeks in the most extreme situations, from we learn about the game to we start bringing it to market.
And do you kind of is there sort of like a template for what that go-to-market strategy might be like, or does it sort of vary quite widely from game to game?
Yeah, good question. So part of how we've had to flex in order to launch this many games is build a system for soft launching a lot of games in a clean and consistent way to understand which of those should actually go to market. And I should probably clarify, when I say that we launched a dozen games in the last 12 months, I mean we soft launched a dozen games. Of those, we'll expect maybe 2 to 3 to actually graduate and prove themselves out in the soft launch, that this game has what it takes to bring to market, to fully invest a launch spend behind and invest months to years of upcoming support for it.
Wow. So kind of you're very comfortable kind of making that unsentimental decision that says, okay, we're going to cut the cord. This game doesn't have kind of the LTV necessary to support long-term or sustain long-term life.
Yeah, it's never an easy decision, because our team is more of a portfolio-based team, where we're just looking at every game coming through the pipeline and seeing which are the best games for Nexon, which are the ones we should be investing behind. But the nature of building a game, there's a whole large team assigned just working on that game. So they're living and breathing that particular title. So it can be a really tough decision and a tough conversation. And I shouldn't position that this is like wholly a decision of the UA team. It's definitely all of the leadership and disciplines coming together to decide this. But yeah, it can be quite painful if you're just working on a single game, and the other teams are coming and saying, hey, this game doesn't have what it takes, we don't think we should launch it. From our perspective, I always thank the other teams and give them a lot of respect when they can see beyond just the game they're working on at that moment to think about the company health and just say, like, yeah, we're making a lot of games. This one doesn't have what it takes. Let's realize that before we invest more money in it and move on.
So thinking then of kind of smaller game studios who don't necessarily have huge amounts of resources, when do you think a game company kind of reaches the tipping point where they need to have a dedicated UA person versus either trying to sort of hack growth with organic or free acquisition sources, sort of bloggers, I assume, PR, kind of reviews, and when does that kind of stop being really the right move, and you kind of need to bring someone in-house?
That's a really good question. I get asked this a lot. I have a lot of friends at small studios. Definitely, at the bare minimum, you want to make sure that you have a game that you think you want to take to market. I've worked with at least one company where I was brought in. Games shipping dates always slip, sometimes by months or years. And I did work at one company where I was brought in. They thought they were ready to start soft launching, but it got kicked out over a year.
Oh wow!
So
were you on payroll for that whole time?
I was definitely doing everything I could to help with other parts of the business, but yes, they didn't need to bring a UA person in quite yet. It's tricky because when it comes to growth hacking, particularly if it's not your core discipline, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Right.
There's not a quick and easy way to just kind of bypass UA and get the same results and benefits from it in this era. So
the industry is too competitive.
Yeah. The workaround that you can do is you can outsource to a UA agency, but it's very tricky because their goals are not going to be aligned to your company. The UA agency, at the end of the day, has one KPI driving them, which is the amount you spend on advertising. And they're going to do anything they can to increase the amount that you're spending on advertising.
Right.
If you compare that to an internal team, like our goal is to get the maximum result possible, spending the least amount of money.
Right.
Yeah. So they're very different approaches. I guess if you can afford a UA person,
you should have one.
and you have a game that's, say, within 3 to 6 months of realistically going to market, I would recommend it. And if not, maybe try to at least get some consulting from someone who has a proven track record in the industry to help advise and keep an eye on an agency that you're using.
Right. And now maybe sort of jumping to soft launches. Can you maybe sort of another way of hacking might be to say, okay, I'll handle soft launch in-house, see I've got a viable kind of, or maybe even just put it out kind of in beta and see if I have a good model on my hands that can sustain user acquisition and then bring someone on.
Yes, but you do still have to figure out how to get enough clean data in soft launch to make sure that's the case. And again, this is where maybe just reaching out to friends at other companies or if you know someone within the UA industry that can point you in the right direction for maybe 1 or 2 strong, consistent quality ad networks to use for soft launch. And you have someone on your, hopefully you have at least one marketing person that's willing to learn enough to manage those 1 or 2 partners. Maybe you can bring it through soft launch, and if you're just trying to get a couple of thousand users with some consistency, that can be a workaround. And then deciding, okay, well, yeah, we're ready to bring this to market. Now let's bring in a UA expert.
Right. Do you guys, how closely do you at Nexon work with kind of the monetization side when you're launching a game, kind of to see what the LTV is like, and therefore kind of what you're able to spend on acquiring a user?
It's an integral part of our model. This is part of why we soft launch a game. So we're in the business of spending our own money to convince people to download a free product. So if we don't plan correctly, we are just setting our money on fire.
Right.
We have to be able to understand, okay, if we bring our free product to the marketplace, what are the trends of spending in the game? What do people spend in the first 7 days, the first 30 days? How can we project this into a model of what we think they'll spend in the first 180 days or more? And then that allows us, along with considering other facts like the organic uplift from our paid users, that allows us to start building a model to say, okay, well, we see that average user spends $5 in the game. We give up 30% of that to the platforms. We see that each user we bring in from UA invites one other user. So now we have this model where we understand that we can, bid. I think that if I'm doing my math right, that comes out to about $7 to break even for a CPI when we are advertising.
So let me ask a slightly maybe provocative question. Can you ever get away without doing a soft launch? No.
I wouldn't recommend it. It's a hard way to lose money, or it's an easy way to lose money rather. So if you can't do a soft launch, I was actually answering this question for a friend the other day that was in this position. My best advice is treat your launch like a soft launch. If you a lot of times there's immovable dates in the industry. You might have an agreement for featuring with one of the platform partners that can't move, or maybe you're making something tied to a movie and it's got to come out at that time. So my recommendation is treat your worldwide date like a soft launch. Still work with the platforms and hope you attain featuring, but don't invest your really heavy marketing spend until you get that performance read. Let make a very conservative spend in the first month. Look at your organics and try to build a model off of that. And usually what I'll try to do is kick the big spend that you would normally spend in the launch month to like month 3. So wait until we get a bunch of users in the game, see how they play and spend over time. Inevitably, there's going to be like that first big update that fixes some glaring problems with any game that's rushed to market. So wait until that's all done and spend that money month 3. And usually, even if there's some pushback of like, oh, well, we got to go big for launch, usually people will be thanking you that you saved them money and found out how the game actually monetizes before you started investing that. Because nature of the business, nature of the business, more often than not, games perform less well than expected. I'm not speaking to Nexon games, but just the industry in general. Every game obviously has high hopes when it has a serious development budget. But wealth in mobile is very concentrated. There's a few companies and a few games making a large percentage of that wealth. So it's not an even slice of the pie. And when you're launching a game, you can't just divide the number of games on the market by the amount of revenue and assume that game's going to make that much.
Yeah, mobile gaming also has its own kind of 1 or 2%, kind of that are where all the wealth is concentrated. Do you think? Is a soft launch the right time then to also kind of be risky, to say I'm going to try traffic sources I haven't tried before, weird and wacky creatives I haven't tried before, or is the opposite true?
Number 2, yes. Number 1, no. So it's a great time to experiment with creative because, as we alluded to earlier, if you can find a creative that is performing twice as well as kind of your standard bread and butter creative that just shows some gameplay, you're going to be able to pay a CPI that's half the cost.
Right.
I won't go too in the weeds with the math on that there, but just trust me, if you have a better performing creative, that you will be able to bid less in the marketplace. As far as experimenting with traffic sources, that's really risky, actually, because the whole point of soft launch, above all else, our team sees ourselves as providers of data to the developer, to the product team, so we can learn about the economy in the game and we can learn about the product performance. And if we make a risky deal for, there's a company that promises us 10-cent CPIs, no
if
questions asked.
It sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. There might be like a short-term hunger, like, oh, well, we can save some money on the project. And, you bring in those 10-cent users and you'd see, wow, no one's even finishing the first level in the game and no one's spending any money. But then when you dig deeper, you realize, oh, well, that traffic source was completely full of fraud and it was an install farm. These are not real users. So a fake user is worth absolutely nothing in a free-to-play product. And if you see CPIs that are too good to be true, or just like a company guaranteeing you CPIs, it's a huge red flag that those are probably not real players.
I want to sort of jump quickly to talking about kind of the East meets West element in gaming, because Nexon has a parent company in Asia. How often are you guys sort of bringing over games that have worked in Asian markets to the US? And does it work vice versa?
Yeah, definitely we do both. So we do more of the former because Nexon Korea, our parent company, are generally credited as being the originators of free-to-play gaming. And they have like a vast portfolio of awesome games. So probably about half of what we did in last year was bringing some of their most promising titles to the West and handling the marketing for those outside of Asia. But we're a younger company here. Our office is called Nexon M, and we are only 4 years old over here. So in the last year or so, we started actually bringing our games with the help of our parent company to the Asian markets. So one of our flagship titles is called Dominations, and this year we brought that game to China, and that was a big landmark for us. So that happened pretty recently. So definitely the flow goes both ways.
So how do you sort of decide? I mean, they're vastly different markets, certainly China and Asia in general. How do you decide what's a viable play for kind of transferring either one way or the other, or releasing in one market or the other?
It's a good question. So again, like soft launching is your friend in this equation, but it's a little different math once the game already exists. So one thing that we see a lot with the titles made by our parent company is they're these big, beautiful, called ARPGs, Asian RPGs or Asian action RPGs. And they resonate very well with more mass culture in those Asian countries, but they're more of niche products in the West. So we would never build and invest in a game just for the Western market because we know it's going to appeal to a very small percentage of players over here. Right. But there's math that really works out to say, okay, well, let's localize this game to English. And then when we launch it, we didn't have the development cost. The game was already made. So now let's use just some of the traffic sources, like some of the social sources that have really fine laser targeting to find just those players that are really interested in these Asian-themed action RPGs. And so our budgets for those games will be much smaller because we're just finding that
needles in the haystack.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Interesting. And does the same apply kind of taking a US game to Korea or other Asian markets?
In theory, yes. I think we're still newer to doing that part of the business. And in a big company, a lot of it is getting the teams to learn from each other's strategies, to learn what tactics work well for the local team. How does the international team take those tactics and translate them to an international audience? So, hopefully if we do another podcast next year, I can tell you more about our experiments in that realm, but it's all still pretty fresh right now.
Right. Well, yeah, that's we'll get that on the books. Do you? My last question will be kind of a more broad one, and it's kind of just how do you see the game industry evolving over the next kind of 5 years? I know 5 years is a very long time in gaming, but if you had to hazard a vision, what would it look like?
Yeah, I don't think that this makes me happy, but I see a lot of consolidation probably happening. I think the dream of like the medium-sized gaming company that makes, one top 50 or top 100 title every 2 years, like that's not sustainable. I think it's more and more a hits-driven business, and the wealth is really concentrated. It doesn't mean that there's not room for the indie studios and the wild ideas. And I think those probably have more of a place than the medium-sized studios. But I think those small studios are going to be taking the big shots, like the wild swings, or maybe hopefully partnering with someone like us at Nexon that has a portfolio of games, so we can produce both these kind of like reliable AAA quality mobile games, but also take these swings with these smaller
wild
passion
ideas.
Projects. Yeah, exactly. And when we have a portfolio of games like ours, we can afford to absorb some of those risks because we have the genres of games that we know will do well. We've launched a bunch of similar games. So it's a little sad to think about that middle ground of the self-sustaining medium-sized studio that's maybe 40 or so people not being able to stick around. But I think with, as you mentioned, like the 1% of companies like having most of the revenue and resources, it's very hard to compete against that unless you somehow ally yourselves with them.
Interesting. And yes, a little sad. Thank you very much for sharing that and for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Indie or AAA?
Indie.
IAPs or ads?
IAPs.
Casual or strategy?
Strategy.
PC or mobile?
Mobile.
Free to play or pay to play?
Free to play.
iOS or Android?
iOS.
Landscape or portrait?
Portrait.
Unity or native?
Unity.
3D or 2D?
2D.
Super Mario or Sonic?
Mario.
AR or VR?
AR.
Shower or bath?
Shower.